going to work on being louder without a mic system. But that being said, we are currently in New Haven, Connecticut at the Evergreen Cemetery. Here at the Evergreen Cemetery, we are surrounded by a lot of big roads in New Haven that are quite busy with traffic, people that are coming in and out of their homes nearby, kids playing ball. So please bear with us as you will hear background noise, but hopefully this time you'll hear us loud and clear. Now, here at Evergreen Cemetery, we are at the burial spot for Midnight Mary, otherwise known as Mary Hart. And it's a very exciting, very special edition of Cemetery Saturday, which is why we wanted to ensure that you got the full effect of it. Because it's not just any other Cemetery Saturday. It's almost like one of our Spooky Story Sundays or one of our Haunted History Tours, where legend meets the past and the unexplained still resonates powerfully today. Now, we're going to have you take a quick look at the front of the stone where we are, as that's really crucial to this story. Mary is buried here, where it says on top, "The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away." It talks about how she fell unconscious when she perished. We are looking at a beautiful pink granite monument here. Now, it is quite ornate, considering Mary's story is not so filled with detail or anything that you may find incredibly exciting. So Mary lived here in the mid to late 1800s, right in New Haven. Now, I mentioned we are on a main road. The main road we're overlooking right now is called Winthrop Avenue. Mary, fittingly, is buried overlooking Winthrop Avenue and lived on Winthrop Avenue throughout her life. Now, Mary perished at age 47 in her home. It was recorded, at least, on Winthrop Avenue. Now, her life prior to that point was a humble one. She was known to be quite a hard worker. She worked in various labor-type jobs, working glass here in New Haven, worked with her hands, made clothing, and sold that. She never married. She never had kids. So she's laboring all day long, and she's living what some might could assume would be lonely. But perhaps there was more to her story, and people always would cheerfully say hello and her back as she would walk down the street. Well, one day, Mary didn't attend work. No one had heard from her. So they went to her house, and sure enough, Mary was on the floor. It looked to be like she was unconscious. When the doctors looked at Mary and studied what was going on and were checking her out, the diagnosis was that she was dead from a stroke, apoplexy, as they called it at the time. So it was the next day that Mary was to be buried right here, nearly a She hears Mary screaming for help. She hears Mary saying that she's stuck in her tomb. She sees Mary writhing, trying to get out, trying to punch the top of the coffin. So the next day, after her nightmare, she goes and alerts the authorities about her vision. Mary is alive. You must get her out of the grave. They dig up Mary, and they look inside and are horrified. Mary is now dead, to be sure, but she was not dead when she was put in there. Her body is just as she envisioned, writhing, trying to get out, scratch marks on the top of the coffin where she had been trying to make it through. Mary had been buried alive. Terrible of that fate. That's more untimely than anything you can imagine. The locals, they said, were not surprised. There's been a terrible disease going around these parts that no one has talked about. It's going around the working class communities. It's causing us to lose consciousness and have a hard time breathing. And people are collapsing to the ground with that unconsciousness for hours, sometimes days. And they're being misdiagnosed as having died. Luckily, many of the people woke up before they made it to their grave, but not Mary. She woke up in the grave. Can you imagine? Of course, that would lead to some of the reasons why Mary may have a legend about her today. Midnight is when she collapsed. Midnight is on top of her tomb. Now some will say, oh, that's a biblical inscription. She was a Christian woman. But midnight saying that you will pass away? Midnight when she passed away? That's tied to Mary's story. And she does come here at this cemetery, whether as a restless spirit, whether as unfinished business, or whether as causing some sort of curse because she was a witch, is yet to be determined. And Andrew is going to fill you in on some of those legends, but before he does, I will tell you how she first appeared after death, and it was not in this cemetery. We lost service for a moment. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything. So shortly after Mary's death, her landlord needed a new tenant here at her house. So a new person moved in, and it was an elderly gentleman. He did not know of Mary Hart. He did not know how she had died. He didn't even know that anyone had just died in the home. Well, one day he gets a knock on the door, and it's a young man. The young man says, oh, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to make sure that the young lady I brought here last night made it home safely and was doing well. The elderly man said, what young lady do you speak of? The young lady, he said, told me her name was Mary and that she lived here. He said, no, Mary lives here. You must have the wrong place. The young man was strangely perturbed by this. He insisted. He picked her up miles away. He brought her home. He knew what had happened. The old man was insistent there was no Mary, but he was bothered by the encounter as well. So he took it upon himself to look at who had lived there prior to him. And he was devastated to find that it was Mary Hart, the woman buried alive, and he knew that it was her ghost trying to come back. Does that story sound familiar? Does it sound like the lady in white or the vanishing hitchhiker? Well, Mary may just be where that story originates. And some say she still does walk up and down the road looking for someone to bring her home. But first, she must come at midnight. And first, at her witching hour at midnight, she must come here. And those who will be here when she comes at midnight will be none too pleased that they are. Andrew is going to tell you why.
Not all who come to visit Mary, or those who see her at all, are quite so lucky as that gentleman who gave her a ride home. No, more often than not, if you encounter Midnight Mary, it will be the last thing that you ever do, and you will die in some gruesome manner. Those who come here often come within their minds a challenge, because the legend of Mystic Mary is that if you are able to withstand being around her at midnight, then somehow you are brave or more powerful than others. But the only thing you risk coming here at midnight is an untimely demise. There are countless tales, but I will tell you just a few. The first is of 3 boys who came here with ill intent and disrespect in their minds. They came here drinking and littering, stepping all over Mary's grave and defiling it. Those boys would be afflicted with the curse. 7 years to the day after the events that they defiled Mary's grave, the first one is found with his throat ripped out. 7 years to the day after that, the second falls. And 7 years to the day after that, the third. But often it doesn't take 21 years for Mary to find her victims. Very often it's at midnight that night when you're here. Like the tale of a couple of sailors. They were wandering by, so the story goes, and just happened to be here at midnight. When they were reported missing, the only thing that was found of them were their hats all around the grave. And excuse us as we have a little festivity in the background. Just take a brief
There's a
pause.
red light for those of you watching, so we might have these tunes for a few moments.
There is, however, still remnants on this fence over at the gate of the spear tips that once lined the entirety of the fence around this graveyard. And those spear tips have claimed quite a few lives. It's said that if you are here at midnight and the sight of Mary doesn't kill you and she doesn't rip your throat out, then very possibly you will impale yourself among one of the spears. They have since taken them down because to this day, any of the college students in the area might show up and try and see if they can challenge Midnight Mary. But if you do, take so at your own warning. You may just get more than you bargained for. There's more to Mary. Maybe we'll explain that now.
So Andrew did a lovely job explaining that terrible, gruesome death of the three friends with the ripped out throats, of the sailors whose hats were left strewn in front of the grave, who impaled themselves and went missing after trying to escape. And those, again, are just a few of the well-known tales of Mary. And the one that I think Andrew and I discussed we found the most haunting was the one about the students from southern Connecticut who just came here, went missing, and their parents were quite distressed. What are we missing of that story? What do they know? What did Mary do with those students? But you can go missing, you can become injured, you may die years later, but will she kill you that night? Should you come here at midnight, will she? The most believed story about Mary in New Haven says she will. You see, there were two young men that decided to come here and take the Midnight Mary challenge. They were going to stay here until the witching hour in which she would appear and hopefully prove her existence. But before midnight came, they noticed what others had reported. The road got quiet. There were no vehicles. There was a stillness in the air. And then a horse and cart came by. And in the horse and cart, it looked as if someone was about to step out on the small platform, when all of a sudden the road turned into a gaping black hole and the cart was sucked into it with the horse, as if it never existed. Was that Midnight Mary's entrance? Was she coming? One of the students was not going to find out on that night. He'd heard this story. That means she was nearby. He left. His friend said, "I'm staying." Well, the very next day, the two friends were supposed to meet up, discuss what had happened to the braver one that remained there till midnight. But that one didn't show up to the meeting. His worried friend, who had made it out of the cemetery, barely alive, as so many do if they make it out when that omen appears, went to the police and reported his friend missing. They went to where they were last together, here. When they come to Midnight Mary Stone, there's a bush nearby. There's shrubs. They see a foot sticking out. They look inside. There is the rigid corpse of his friend. And they recorded the cause of death. Someone scared him to death. Mary. She warned them. One took heed. The other did not. So Midnight Mary, is she just a working class woman who had such an uneventful life that her parents, feeling sorry for her, made sure that she had this remarkable stone so that she would be remarkable in death? Is it her that has made this legend in death because her life was so quiet? Or is she just restless, trying to make herself known? It's believed her parents may have done the stone, but not proven. believed she, of course, may be restless because she was very much buried alive. But what you need to figure out, if the legends are true, she was powerful. She may have had some abilities as a witch, and she took those abilities to the other side. I think that that's a possibility myself. So you see, we are not here at midnight. We are not going to test that. We've come as a group with still a little bit of daylight left. Full disclaimer, should you come here at midnight, you go at your own risk and you tread illegally in this cemetery. So be careful what you do. Now, Andrew and I are going to sign off for now. We're going to spend a few more moments with Midnight Mary and her many offerings here from the local community. Marty will show you one more close-up of her stone, and then we will be back with Sunshine and do a little mini investigation live. I say little because it's cold and